The temperature in Washington, D.C. on that brisk April morning was chilly, but inside the Senate Intelligence Committee chamber, the atmosphere was electric. All eyes were on Capitol Hill as C-SPAN broadcasted the live hearing across the nation. The subject of the day, a classified foreign intelligence briefing that had gone public, causing waves across diplomatic circles in Europe and Asia. Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and ex-CIA director, had been subpoenaed to testify. The leaks had allegedly stemmed from sensitive files dating back to the Trump administration's first term, documents detailing clandestine operations involving NATO allies and covert trade negotiations with nations like China and Turkey. Pompeo walked into the chamber confidently, a slight smirk on his face, as if daring anyone to challenge his legacy. Wearing a crisp dark suit with his trademark American flag pin, he exuded the presence of someone who danced with world leaders and stared down global adversaries. He had handled interrogations, diplomacy, war councils, but what awaited him today would be different. At the head of the committee sat Senator Adam Schiff, now a seasoned Democrat from California, known for his prosecutorial flair, eloquence, and piercing logic. A man loved by many progressives and loathed by most MAGA loyalists, Schiff had come prepared. As the gavel struck the sound block, Schiff leaned into the mic. "Good morning. This hearing is now in session. Secretary Pompeo, thank you for appearing before us today. We have serious questions. The American people deserve clarity and truth." Pompeo leaned back and offered a nod. "Of course, Senator. I'm happy to clarify any confusion, though I suspect the confusion is manufactured." A chuckle rose from the Republican side of the bench, but Schiff didn't blink. Instead, he held up a printed copy of the leaked dossier. The red stamps of top secret, still visible even though parts had been declassified for this hearing. "Let's begin with document C-17, Schiff began. "In March of 2020, you authorized secret back-channel communications between U.S. diplomats and the Turkish government regarding sanctions relief in exchange for intelligence sharing. This was never disclosed to Congress. Why?" Pompeo adjusted his posture. "Senator, that operation was lawful under executive authority. We were operating in the interest of national security. President Trump was briefed and approved it. That's what leadership looks like: decisive, swift, and strategic." Schiff smiled slightly, but his eyes were sharp. "So you're saying the ends justify the means?" "I'm saying real diplomacy isn't about memos and meetings. It's about results." That was the trigger Schiff had been waiting for. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Pompeo. "Mr. Secretary, what you call results, others would call betrayals of our allies, of our intelligence partners, and of our very Constitution." Gasps rippled in the room. But Pompeo was unshaken. "Senator, I get it. You love drama." Schiff raised an eyebrow. "I love democracy." He continued, flipping to a different section. "In document F-12, dated May 2020, there's an exchange between your office and a former Eastern European diplomat. The topic? Surveillance on U.S. journalists. That's not just unconstitutional, that's Orwellian." Pompeo's smile faded slightly. "We were tracking foreign influence operations, Senator. Some journalists were being used." "Used?" Schiff cut him off. "You're saying American citizens were being monitored because they were inconvenient?" The room was silent. Even Republican senators who had come ready to defend Pompeo were looking down, scribbling notes or shifting uncomfortably. Then came the moment. Schiff slowly stood up, holding a single page. "This is an internal memo from your team. It says, and I quote, 'We must neutralize critics before the 2020 election, especially those with media platforms.'" Neutralize? Critics? That's not diplomacy. That's authoritarianism. Pompeo narrowed his eyes. "Context matters, Senator. That language wasn't mine." Schiff leaned in. And then, with a calm, ice-cold voice, he dropped the line that would replay across networks for days. "Mr. Secretary, history will remember that you didn't protect America, you protected a presidency." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to pause. The committee chamber held its breath, stunned by the force of the accusation. Pompeo opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Schiff sat back, emotionless, having delivered the blow. The sound of rustling papers and shifting bodies filled the air after Schiff's now viral line. "You didn't protect America, you protected a presidency." It hit the committee chamber like a lightning strike, reverberating in the minds of everyone present. Pompeo, momentarily speechless, gathered himself. His lips pressed tightly together as he leaned toward the mic. I find your insinuation offensive, Senator Schiff, he said in a lower, colder tone. I spent my life defending this country from West Point to the CIA to the State Department. I don't need lectures from a man who leaks more than he legislates. The tension ramped up. Schiff didn't flinch. Then answer the question, who authorized the surveillance operation noted in document F-12? I declined to answer on grounds of national security, Pompeo shot back. Schiff interlocked his fingers, calm and composed. The classic dodge. But this isn't a courtroom, Mr. Secretary. It's Congress. If you won't cooperate, we'll compel the testimony. Senator Josh Hawley, a staunch Trump ally, interjected. Mr. Chairman, Hawley barked, are we really going to pretend that Secretary Pompeo didn't operate in the national interest? Or that this hearing isn't a political hit job against President Trump's administration? Schiff turned to Hawley with a neutral expression. Senator Hawley, the integrity of our democracy doesn't belong to one administration. It belongs to the people. And if public servants acted outside the Constitution, we owe them answers. Pompeo, meanwhile, had retrieved a binder from his legal team. He opened it and scanned through notes, clearly preparing for the next round of crossfire. Across America, the hearing had gripped the nation. CNN aired the footage with a banner that read, Bombshell, Schiff versus Pompeo, Democracy on Trial. Fox News, on the other hand, ran with Pompeo under fire, partisan theater, or legit investigation? Social media was ablaze. Hashtag Pompeo versus Schiff began trending within minutes, alongside hashtags like hashtag Democracy on Trial and hashtag Protect the Truth. Inside the chamber, Senator Lisa Murkowski, a moderate Republican, cleared her throat. Secretary Pompeo, she began, regardless of party affiliation, we have a duty to ask, were any journalists or U.S. citizens surveilled under your authority? Pompeo sighed deeply. Senator, the intelligence community works under FISA courts and executive oversight. At no time were illegal surveillance methods used. Schiff flipped a tab. Document F-12 says otherwise. It mentions domestic intelligence gathered outside FISA protocols. That's the issue. You bypassed the legal channels. Pompeo leaned forward. Senator, there are gray areas in intel gathering, especially when foreign entities use American proxies. You of all people should know that. Schiff stared at him. I do. That's why I'm asking again. Did you monitor U.S. journalists without a warrant? Pompeo's jaw tensed. His lawyers whispered in his ear, but Schiff interrupted. For the record, Schiff said clearly, the witness is refusing to answer a direct question on constitutional violations. Let the record reflect non-cooperation. The murmurs began again. Some spectators in the chamber, members of the press and citizen observers, exchanged glances. Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin now spoke up. Mr. Secretary, if any of this is true, you've not only broken the law, but undermined the First Amendment. Pompeo responded, this time with visible frustration. No laws were broken. What I did was in response to threats most of you don't even know exist. Schiff fired back. Then perhaps you should have trusted Congress, not silenced it. The session was reaching a boiling point. At that moment, Schiff signaled for a short recess. 50-minute break, he announced, and banged the gavel. Pompeo rose from his chair quickly, his legal team gathering around him. Schiff remained seated, flipping through the final tab in his binder, one that hadn't been revealed yet. It was labeled Appendix G, Operation Sparrowhawk. This would be the ace up his sleeve. As the room cleared, cameras turned off, and the tension spilled into whispered conversations, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a Senate hearing anymore. It was turning into a historic reckoning. The 15-minute recess passed in tense silence. Reporters scrambled outside the Senate chamber, phones buzzing with updates, while talking heads speculated over what Appendix G, Operation Sparrowhawk, might contain. Back inside, the drama hadn't cooled. In fact, the storm was just getting started. As the committee reconvened, Schiff leaned into his mic with a cold determination. His voice was measured, but it carried the weight of a prosecutor revealing the final piece of the puzzle. Let's resume, he said, locking eyes with Pompeo, who had now returned looking slightly more wary. Mr. Secretary, before the break, you declined to confirm or deny whether journalists were unlawfully surveilled. Pompeo didn't respond. Schiff continued. I now direct your attention to Appendix G, a file obtained through whistleblower testimony. It refers to Operation Sparrowhawk, initiated in June 2020, reportedly under your authority while serving as Secretary of State. At the mention of the operation's name, Pompeo's expression tightened. Operation Sparrowhawk, Schiff repeated, was a joint task operation between the Department of State and a private contractor known as Chronix Solutions. The goal, to digitally monitor domestic critics of President Trump in the lead-up to the 2020 election. Gasps rang through the chamber again. Even staffers seated behind the senators exchanged stunned glances. Schiff held up a redacted page and read aloud. Targets include political commentators, investigative journalists, and opposition-linked academics. Monitoring to include social media metadata, location tracking, and communications flagged for anti-administration narratives. Pompeo slammed his hand on the table. This is absurd. That's not an intelligence report, it's fiction. Schiff remained steady. You're under oath, Secretary. Did you authorize Chronix Solutions to conduct surveillance on U.S. citizens without judicial approval? Pompeo was silent. Do you deny that your office received daily briefings on these flagged individuals? Schiff pressed. Still silence. Do you deny the name Sparrowhawk was used within internal communications from your senior deputy on June 23, 2020 at precisely 7:42 a.m.? Pompeo finally spoke. That operation, whatever it was, if it existed, was never intended to infringe on rights. It was a threat analysis protocol. You wouldn't understand the complexity of safeguarding a nation during an election where foreign manipulation was rampant. Schiff didn't flinch. You're suggesting spying on journalists is complex patriotism? Pompeo raised his voice. I'm suggesting that when enemies hide behind the First Amendment, we don't tie our hands. We act. The room turned cold. Senator Bernie Sanders, sitting in the back, mumbled into his mic, "You acted like a tyrant." The room shifted. Schiff could feel it. He'd reached a point of no return. He stood again. Mr. Secretary, I submit to this committee the full unredacted memo from Chronix Solutions, along with an internal invoice to the Department of State, showing disbursement of $2.7 million in discretionary funds for the execution of Operation Sparrowhawk. He passed copies to the clerk. This was signed by your deputy, and it bears your initials in approval. Pompeo's lawyer interjected. Mr. Chairman, we move to dismiss these documents on grounds of national security and chain of custody violations. But Schiff held up another document. A letter from the whistleblower, protected under federal law. This testimony has been vetted. The American people deserve to know what was done in their name and against them. Pompeo finally stood, looming over the table. Adam, you don't know what you're playing with. These leaks, these accusations, they endanger everyone. Schiff fired back. What endangers this country, Mr. Pompeo, isn't the truth. It's the belief that power makes you immune to it. The committee sat in stunned silence once more. Mike Pompeo, the hawkish diplomat once regarded as impenetrable, now stood visibly shaken. His silence was louder than words. America was watching. That single phrase from Schiff, "Power doesn't make you immune to the truth," exploded across the country. News networks ran it on loop. College professors wrote about it. Memes were born. Historians took notes. Inside the chamber, Schiff's eyes narrowed. There will be consequences for this, he said calmly. And not just political ones. As Schiff's final words echoed in the hearing room, there will be consequences for this. And not just political ones. It felt like the weight of years of institutional secrets had finally cracked. The committee, once again in stunned silence, had witnessed a transformation, a Senate oversight proceeding now turning into a reckoning of executive overreach. The press went wild. Within hours, every major news network had broken into live coverage. CNN ran a 3-panel screen showing Schiff's quote, the leaked Chronix documents, and footage of Pompeo frozen in silence. MSNBC dubbed it the constitutional crossfire. Even Fox News, normally a bastion for Trump-aligned narratives, took a more cautious tone. Tucker Carlson's primetime replacement, Owen Masters, admitted, "If Operation Sparrowhawk is real and if the documents are verified, we're talking about a breach of trust unlike anything we've seen since Watergate." Hashtags like #Sparrowhawk scandal, #Pompeo leaks, and #Truth on trial shot to the top of X, formerly Twitter. College campuses erupted in protest. Journalism unions issued immediate condemnations. Editorials in the Washington Post and New York Times called for a full criminal investigation. Back in the Capitol, the fallout spread rapidly. Senator Elizabeth Warren called an emergency press conference demanding that the Department of Justice appoint a special prosecutor. Senator Rand Paul surprisingly backed the idea, not in support of Schiff but in concern over growing surveillance powers in the federal government. And President Donald Trump? He was silent. No tweet, no Truth Social post, no public appearance. That silence only deepened the speculation. Inside the White House, sources leaked that Trump was furious with Pompeo for letting the deep state take control of the narrative. There were rumors that Trump was considering throwing Pompeo under the bus to shield his own re-election campaign from being consumed by the scandal. Meanwhile, Schiff and his legal team prepared for what came next. A criminal referral to the Department of Justice. In a live press briefing the next morning, Schiff stood before a room packed with reporters and with a stack of documents in hand said, "This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about the rule of law. Today, I am formally referring former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for investigation into violations of the First and Fourth Amendments, abuse of public office, and misuse of government funds." It was the political equivalent of lighting a match inside a powder keg. Pompeo, now surrounded by a wall of legal fire, fired back. From his office in Virginia, flanked by 2 attorneys and speaking to a group of conservative media figures, Pompeo gave a defiant press conference. "What Adam Schiff and his allies are doing is nothing short of a witch hunt. We operated in the interest of American safety. The only people who should be on trial are the ones who exposed our national secrets to the world." His supporters rallied online. Conspiracy theories blossomed overnight. Some claimed the documents were planted. Others blamed the CIA. One particularly viral theory alleged that Chronix Solutions had deep ties to European intelligence agencies and were part of a broader anti-Trump alliance. But the facts were hard to deny. The contracts were real. The whistleblower's voice had now gone public in an exclusive with CBS's 60 Minutes. And the testimonies from junior officials in the State Department had begun piling up, confirming what Schiff revealed, that Pompeo had authorized a program to track journalists and political critics under a veil of secrecy using taxpayer dollars, without judicial or congressional approval. All this while Donald Trump, still president, remained cloaked in silence. Whispers of impeachment buzzed through liberal media circles. Could Pompeo's scandal splash back on Trump himself? Would Sparrowhawk be the Achilles heel of Trump's second presidency? Schiff, for his part, didn't care about re-election. He told his staff earlier that morning, "This isn't about politics anymore. It's about drawing the line before there's nothing left to protect." As Part 4 of this high-stakes story came to a close, one thing was clear. America was waking up to a bitter truth. In the name of security, their freedoms had been quietly auctioned off. And now, the reckoning was just beginning. The following weeks were unlike anything Washington had seen in recent memory. By the second Monday after the hearing, the Department of Justice confirmed it had opened a formal investigation into Operation Sparrowhawk. Subpoenas were issued to high-ranking Trump-era officials. Federal agents raided Chronix Solutions data storage facilities in Arlington. Hard drives were seized. Password-protected servers were cracked open. What they found validated everything Schiff had warned the nation about. Tens of thousands of pages of internal communications. Metadata logs that showed geolocation data of journalists in real time. Lists of political risk factors that included not just activists and columnists, but even some Republican voices who had criticized Trump's approach to foreign policy. And now, for the first time in his public career, Mike Pompeo was facing indictment. But Schiff wasn't celebrating. If anything, he looked wearier, older. Exhausted from the emotional war he'd waged on truth's behalf. He walked the Capitol halls with a manila folder tucked under his arm. Inside it, copies of all 5 whistleblower reports that had come forward in the aftermath of his hearing. These weren't just government employees, they were patriots who risked their careers and in some cases their safety to expose what had been done in the shadows. America was at a crossroads. President Donald Trump finally broke his silence 2 weeks after the hearing. Standing on the White House lawn before boarding Marine One, he addressed the press in a rare and calculated appearance. "Look, I didn't know about this thing they're calling Sparrowhawk. I trust Mike. I trusted a lot of people. Some were good, some weren't. But this is a witch hunt. Adam Schiff is doing what he always does. He's a fraud. You'll see. None of it sticks." But it did stick. Schiff had released the full timeline, validated by Senate oversight. A special counsel had been appointed. And public opinion was shifting fast. A Gallup poll showed that 68% of Americans believed Pompeo's surveillance was unconstitutional and 52% believed President Trump knew more than he admitted. Outside the Capitol, peaceful protests spread. Students carried signs reading, "We are not your targets." Veterans held banners that read, "I didn't serve to see the Constitution betrayed." And journalists showed up with tape over their mouths, symbolizing their fight for press freedom. Meanwhile, Schiff received death threats daily. But he remained undeterred. On a Thursday afternoon in May, he addressed the Senate again, not in a hearing, but on the floor. His voice, steady but heavy, carried a closing message to the American people. "I didn't come to Congress to be liked. I came to protect the sacred trust placed in us by our Constitution. If we allow power to surveil, silence, and suppress in secret, then we've already surrendered everything this republic was built to defend. I have no illusions I will be hated for this. But if one young journalist out there keeps writing, if one whistleblower still dares to speak truth to power, then I know we've done something right." His words were etched into the congressional record and later cited by constitutional law scholars around the world. Pompeo, for his part, pleaded the fifth at his criminal deposition. But the damage was done. In the court of public opinion, he was finished. In a stunning announcement 6 months later, the Senate passed bipartisan legislation limiting executive surveillance powers, the most sweeping reform since the Church Committee of the 1970s. And it was unofficially named the Schiff-Pompeo Act after the two men who had stood on opposite sides of a line that would define a generation. As for Adam Schiff, he didn't run for president. He didn't start a podcast. He didn't join a corporate board. He returned to California, taught constitutional law at Stanford, and kept a framed quote in his office. Power doesn't make you immune to the truth. In the end, his legacy was not built on popularity, but principle. A reminder that sometimes one sentence spoken at the right moment in front of the entire country can silence a man, stir a nation, and shake the very pillars of power.